Hello, my name is Teresa Fry Brown. I'm professor of homiletics and the director of the Black Church Studies program at Candler School of Theology, Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And you are watching a magnificent show, Empowering Voices. Thank you.
Empowering Voices is in conversation with the Reverend Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, professor of homiletics and the director of the Black Church Studies program at the Candler School of Theology of Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to Empowering Voices.
Thank you. Thank you.
First question, we are honored to have you here within the context of the caliber of homiletics, especially at such a time as this, when our nation, in fact the world, is focused on the issue of Trayvon Martin, who was killed on a Sunday. Within the context of homiletics and the preaching of the need for preaching about injustices, would you speak to this issue?
Speaking to the issue as a whole, I think it's important for us to remember when we talk about homiletics that too many times our preaching becomes reactive and not active. So I think at the foundation of the incident with Trayvon Martin, his murder, with things that happen every day in the lives of the persons who come to the churches, the members of the congregation, people in the community, that one sermon is not going to solve anything, that someone has to be consistently walking the edge, making sure that they're attending to the margins of society, that this is one incident that was brought to the forth by the media. However, what are we looking at every day? So I say to preachers, instead of just taking the first issue that's there, what are you preaching consistently? Are we preaching, give me, give me, give me, or are we taking care of the whole body of Christ? This is why I write on womanist homiletics. And therein we're talking about communalism and how it becomes important that it's not a me, me, me theology, but an us. That we talk about being very critically engaged, which means that I don't take at face value anything that's going on, but I take the time to research. Preachers need to take the time to research the facts, get all the information, and then again, constantly raise awareness of what's going on in our community, raise awareness of issues around racism, and not taking media or not taking some politician or even another minister's word for it, but do the groundwork yourself. We're talking in terms of not getting lost, thinking that Christine Smith writes about webs of oppression. So making sure we don't do the issue of the day in our preaching, but we also understand that people are dealing in their own vine and fig tree, in their own place, with many, many issues. And many people are feeling left out because we choose one thing and run with it. And so it's like a distraction sometimes. We'll get very focused on one issue and then all these other things are falling apart. So we're always in a catch-up system. So I think prophetic voices or prophetic preaching, whether we're talking about a womanist homiletic or preaching in general, means that one must always have one's heart, soul, and mind on the pulse of the community, that one must look at the biblical text to see how it is being addressed and not to push it into a biblical text. But one also has to be passionate about caring for people. I think at the crux of preaching, from a womanist standpoint and prophetically, is you have to love the people enough to care. And I'm not seeing that often enough. And so that would be just off the top of my head. Okay.
And if you would, Dr. Fry Brown, talk more about womanist homiletics. Just recently I had a real lived experience where an ordained male minister said, I'm tired of you talking about that womanist rhetoric. That doesn't mean anything, Joan.
Mm-hmm. I think that over the last 25 years, people have become very reactive to saying womanists because they think it means black women who hate everybody. Instead of looking at our striving for, one of the tenets of womanist discourse is survival of all people. And across the course of history, black women have had voices that have been muted, have had voices that have been ignored, have been challenged with trying to kill people with the way they talk. They're always angry, they're this, that, and the other, instead of understanding that we too, as part of humanity, have something to say. And so womanist discourse means we will not be silenced, that we have to be audacious, we have to be bold. It doesn't mean we want to kill everyone. It means God created me equal, just like you, so I have something to say. So instead of always pushing the button saying, and I think it's reactive to say, I'm tired of hearing about womanists. It reminds me of white saying, I'm tired of hearing about civil rights. because people get locked into power dynamics, and they think that if you're a womanist and you identify not as a feminist but as a womanist, a woman of color who's interested in the survival of all people, who's interested in community, who's interested in being forthright in what we believe, who's interested in making sure that all the babies live, that I think that's a reactive statement. I don't think that it would be received very well if I said, I'm tired of hearing black men talk about how sad it is for black men, because that would not be womanist work. Womanist work would be, I hear you saying that, and I would like for us to have a conversation because I'm also going through something. So let's see how together we can work this out so that we all are standing on equal ground. It's the ground is level at the foot of the cross piece, but I think that we get castigated as unholy women, as angry women, because there's power in the voice of black women. And so when I'm writing about womanist discourse, and I've been writing now for about 5 years, I always have to remind people that no more than James Cone was trying to kill all the white people when he wrote about black theology, am I trying to kill all the people, period, when I'm talking about black women's voices. So that becomes a critically important piece. And if we're going to talk about prophetic preaching, it is not prophetic preaching if I have to downgrade someone else to make myself look better. That's not prophetic preaching. That's angry, and it's not life affirming. So that becomes critically important too.
Within the context of you teaching current preachers, current pastors, future voices, and also within the context when you intersect that with the fact that the sociologists are saying moving forward in the 21st century, the United States is becoming a more dominant nation of color, if you will. Mm-hmm. How is the preparation process within the context of homiletics? What is happening at the seminaries for pastors of today and the future to deal with that fact?
I think that it would depend on the seminary and the program, and of course the professor, because we understand there are people at seminaries who want to keep the status quo, who want to say this group must always in power, Christ looks like this group, we must always follow the line and thought of, as one of my students said, dead white men. There are others who, depending on the seminary, is trying to prepare younger preachers, because they're coming to seminary now much younger, right out of undergraduate, with a broader vision of the world instead of narrowing what is standard to one person. Broader leadership paradigms by age and gender and sexuality and ethnicity, by the social construct of race, that we consider everyone, because what's happening, as we can see in politics right now, is because there seems to be this cloud of the colored people are coming. So let's hunker down and make sure they have no power. And so if we are still producing preachers and pastors who have that mentality, then we will become obsolete as a country. But I think that it becomes for younger, when I'm listening to the younger preachers, the younger pastors, the students come in, they have an optimism about moving toward a beloved society that I didn't find in a group, say, 20 years ago, who were doing the reactionary piece, the backlash of everything that had been done. But this group, whose parents may not have been in church, whose parents know nothing about civil rights movement, who know nothing about the women's liberation movement, this is a group that comes in, and I'm not saying they're overly optimistic, they want in their heart for us to be equal. And so they're the ones that one move makes them very excited. So it's to keep a balance between optimism and reality, but also giving them a broad perspective of what possibilities there are for us in the future, and an understanding that if we're going to study a text that says God is no respecter of persons, then we have to live the text that God is no respecter of persons.
And within that context, if you will, that God is a respecter of all persons, but then we also include, there is a theology, a neoconservative theology, if you will, that is causing there to be an alarming negative discourse about who is God, and God loves a certain group of people because of their color, because they're rich, right, because of the car they drive, or even because they're Republican, Democrat, Independent.
Right. I think that part of what goes on is my grandmother, who's 102, used to say something about a squeaky wheel getting the grease. And I think that part of the challenge for working with pastors and working in churches is to help people find their voices so that they're not afraid that someone's going to come and squash them. That goes to the reactionary piece that we talked about earlier. People feel muted. And so part of what we have to do, I think, in churches and in seminaries and in communities is to, the old saying of hearing someone is speaking has to go back, because I think fear and this pressure, this, I don't know if it's neoconservative, it's rich, wealth, 1%. They have access to have their voices heard. That doesn't mean that their voices are right. They just have more access. And so I can talk to people in a nursing care facility that have the solution, but they have no hookup to where they can say what's going on. I can talk to one of the youth at the church. They know what to do, but they don't have access. And so when we used to be able to hook up with someone else, you and I would talk about things. We're so fragmented that it would be wonderful if we used our social media to connect voices instead of critiquing people's spirituality. It would be wonderful if we could use time on Sunday, not just for praising God, but working God, and teaching people, as we were taught, to stand and ask the question and not be deterred when people boo them. Teaching people to walk an edge of risk, which may mean you're going to lose your job, but at least you will be able to say, I made a difference. And letting them know that a difference doesn't mean that we're going to change everything today. It means that if my voice joins your voice and joins another voice and joins another voice, then that's how, as we learn in transformation, that's how change happens. Change does not happen like this. Change happens when one person finds an identity with another person. That's saving all people, that I went back to the womanist discourse. And then we continue to talk, and we listen at the same time for another voice over here who's saying something similar, instead of always, and this is neoconservative, but it's the way the country was built. I fear that we allow ourselves to be people who we let the powers that be give us a spokesperson. And when we have one spokesperson that can run in, photo op, say something, and run back out, it disempowers the people that are there.
So if you would just speak to that neoconservative discourse, if you will, I will say that it's a part of the foundation of America.
I think it is. Because when America was founded, we came from a country that had kings and queens. So you had a monarch, you had one person that was in leadership. And that kind of mentality, I think, has come through the centuries. And as a people, I'm talking about people of the diaspora, we have seemingly bought into, let me designate your leader for you. And so we're in a system now where we have a person designated. So that one person, they fly in, says something about a situation, they go back out, but that still leaves people that are close to a situation with no voice. And so part of our work is to, number one, teach all of us that God puts as much leadership in you as in me, that God puts an idea in you like God puts an idea in me, and stop letting the media designate Mr. So-and-so, da-da-da, which is why there are no women's voices, and women are walking around with tape around them, because we're in a country where a male's voice is better than a female's voice. But I wasn't talking about that. and so I think that when you talk about how we're going to be prophetic and activists, is we have to even empower children to have voice. And in doing so, we have to listen to them and not try to dissuade them so quickly from that you don't know. And so we give people a list of you don'ts instead of looking at what they can do. Womanist work is taking even a 5-year-old and listening to that 5-year-old on the level they're at and saying, oh, I didn't think about that. And then working with them, because maybe I can connect over here and do something, but always remembering that's where that came from, instead of flying in one person to do it all the time. Because when you have one person that does it all the time, you kill them and you have to start over again. Yeah.
Our famous last question, if you will, for Empowering Voices, or noted last question. This podcast series is intentionally titled Empowering Voices, Uplifting the Voice of the Voiceless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is uplifting a part of theology, of biblical studies, of homiletics? If so, why not?
I use the terminology both in the Black Church Studies program that I direct, in homiletics classes, and in talking with other womanist scholars. Um, there's a word that I use called empowerment, which means that I connect with something inside of me and that I'm able to act. And then there's empowerment, where someone is trying to make you do something. I think we have to be very clear that voices sound differently, that sometimes people do not have an audible voice, but their actions speak. And so we have to be more multisensory with our engagement of each other and empowering those. And so if we're going to talk about voiceless, maybe someone is not able to auditorily say something, but watch their actions. So they do, in fact, have a voice. It's also to look at social, political, spiritual, physical kinds of means, so everyone has open access. And stop inviting them to our table, but let's go build a new table together. That's where that comes, okay? And then memory, finally, becomes critically important. We have voice today in some areas. We have not always had voice, but it is through connections with other people, it's through education, it's through some grace that we have voice now. And so instead of saying, you don't, I don't remember, we need to remember what we had to do to get to where we are now. And not tell people to do it, but share with them this means, and open up a few doors, because my fear is too many of us with voices close doors on those who cannot find their voice. They have it, but they may not locate it or have an audience to listen to it.